The world's social media giants Twitter and Facebook, along with some other platforms, have decided to limit or ban U.S. President Donald Trump from using their services. The decisions came 2 days after the violent storming of the Capitol building by Trump supporters, whom the U.S. president has referred to as patriots in his tweets. While some cheer the moves, others are questioning the enormous power that tech giants wield and are asking if such a move violates freedom of speech. What's the social responsibility when it comes to politics, and where's the line? I'm pleased to be joined for the discussion from Shanghai by Professor Shen, Director of the International Institute of Cyberspace Governance Research from Fudan University, and from Hong Kong, Professor Daya Thussu from Hong Kong Baptist University. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So I want to go to Professor Thussu first. Help us understand the exact reason why Twitter decided to go ahead and ban permanently Trump's Twitter account, although in the past it deleted, it limited, but it never really just permanently suspend this account.
I think what happened in the United States a few days ago was totally unprecedented. So Twitter's argument was that if they didn't stop President Trump using the social media, and especially that particular platform, to create chaos, they had to do something. But I think the reason could be more complicated than that, because Mr. Trump has actually used that platform for the last 4 years to say all kinds of things, and some of these bordering on very serious violation of factual information. But because he's on his way out, so I think that the Twitters of the world and other platforms could take that bold decision because they realize that the regime is changing and Mr. Trump couldn't do very much. So I think there is that reason also, which is not being talked about much, but I do think it's an indication of shift in power. And since he's going to leave in 8-9 days, it was something they could afford to do. They couldn't do that when he was in power.
Professor Shen, what is your take on this? It's a very interesting point, because I want to ask this hypothetical question. If Trump is reelected, do you think, even if he might have violated some of the Twitter rules, do you think Twitter would have moved to permanently ban him?
3 points. The first, according to U.S. law, especially according to the U.S. Constitution, de facto, the Twitter did have the right either to delete or ban the account. And the second, your hypothesis is very interesting. The Twitter's behavior, he has a flexible of the space to behave. He can choose either delete the contents, lego it, or ban the account. But he finally chose the banned account. It's highly political choice. It's highly or very closely related to whether Trump is a president re-elected or president just waiting for his last day in the White House. And the third, the Twitter and Facebook set a very good or shocking examples to how far that these platforms can, the owner of the platforms can go on to limit or to censor or to management people's behavior on these social media platforms. So I think that's very interesting things.
Yeah. Well, by discussing, the power, where's the limit of the power of these social media platforms, by no means I want to disclaim here that by no means we support any of the messages that President Trump is sending out or is perceived to be sending out, such as inciting violence. But I think it is a very valid discussion to be had. And I want to ask this question to Daya, because it seems that sometimes the standard is not very clear. Is there a clear criterion as to what kind of content will be deleted, what kind of account will be deleted, and what not?
Absolutely, you're right. There isn't a very clearly defined law, as it were. And you should also remember that President Trump had a huge following on Twitter, 84 million followers. That's a huge number. And let's also not forget that Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms are big businesses. So when somebody as important as the President of the United States tweets something, it is retweeted in 1 million times, and each time it is transformed from one account to another, somebody is making money in that bargain. So there's also a huge commercial imperative that one should take into account. As my fellow panelist was saying, these decisions are political. They are not, as I said before, they could have, suspended the account previously because President has said things which were proved subsequently to be actually factually totally incorrect. And he has said things which can be construed not just in the context of the United States, but the world over. He said things about countries which actually border on incitement, So they didn't do that because it's also a huge business and they don't want to upset that arrangement. But it also indicates how powerful they are if they can block the account of the most powerful individual on the planet. Just imagine what they can do to ordinary people like us or, any other social media user.
Exactly.
That's also a frightening thing.
Exactly. That's the kind of question that people are asking on these social media platform. For instance, they're saying, for countries such as India, which is using, despite the huge number of talents they have in terms of computing, in terms of mathematics, in terms of software, they're using American social media platforms and search engines. So what kind of concern is there, Professor Shen, about the influence and the reach these platforms have, especially in terms of politics? One day if they decide that, okay, we're going to shut someone out, or we're going to shut a region or an economy out, they can just switch off.
So it's the time to set up kind of regime of the governance. Such kind of regime will be composed by different kind, including the laws. Laws set up the bottom lines, those red lines, very clear lines. And the norms, those norms based on consensus, those consensus should be based among the agreement and the bargain with the individual actors, the companies, the platform owners, the governance, the regulators, and so on. And some kind of, habits. Sometimes when you have the powers, you need to become a little bit cautious to use these powers. Sometimes you can do something, but you could not really do it in the maximum ways. Otherwise, you will break that consensus. So in short, we face a very new areas which we need to develop or to complete a new systems of governance so that we can build proper norms to ensure we can take advantage of these things and try to avoid such kind of either challenges, crisis in future.
Yeah, well, this term of freedom of speech seems to be a golden card whenever people talk about regulating speech, especially in a Western society. This question comes up, you're living George Orwell's 1984, free speech no longer exists, it died with big tech. So to me, two things. First of all, this phrase has been glorified to an extent that is misleading, and secondly, it has been used as a kind of catch-all excuse. Whenever you criticize something or you say something, you post something, and somebody tries to regulate that, or somebody tries to regulate a toxic content, it is criticized for breaching freedom of speech. Daya, your take?
Yes, of course. It's particularly a very dominant discourse in the United States because the Constitution is very emphatic about protecting freedom of expression. And in many other democracies, that is the case. But the bigger question really is about who is governing those massive platforms, where is their responsibility? I mean, if Facebook was a country, it would be the world's largest country in terms of number of people. It's got more people than India and China. So there has been some movement, for example, within the European Union to put some structures in place in terms of privacy issues, surveillance issues. So that's happening within democratic systems where people realize that this big tech is becoming too powerful and intervene in not just their social lives but also in their political processes.
Okay.
So the process has already begun.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. But these multinational capitals are so powerful. They're so powerful. They have so much money, right? And so much influence. As you say, the number of users on Facebook is more than the people combined of India and China. But one last question. I want to go to Professor Shen, and it's about transparency. It seems that the standard of transparency is not very uniform here, too. When it comes to President Trump's account ban, they explained why they wanted to ban because potentially he was glorifying violence. And yet recently a tweet was deleted, let's say, by Twitter that was sent out by the Chinese embassy in the United States, which was tweeting about Uyghur women and Uyghur population changes, and the tweet was taken off, and Facebook said it violated the Twitter rules, but Twitter did not provide further details, right? And when it comes to Trump, as I said, Twitter said it will continue to be transparent about its policies and their enforcement. So, Professor Shen, how much do we know about these standards and rules?
So here are the questions you already mentioned. First, we should not take those terms in a very simple and abstract ways like the transparency, freedom of speech. We need to take a quite practical and a cooperative attitude to understand and develop a more detailed system of rules governing these systems. And the second, the reality is these platform owners like Twitter and Facebook has their own political standards, have own political positions, and then sometimes, especially when doing the things with China, they use their political positions to justify or to filter those standard of operating, and then the tools or the platforms become a highly politicalized platforms full of those censored and distorted information. That's quite unfair and unequal, especially to China. And the last, of course, not the least, in future we need to change. We need a very deep reforms of these rule systems. Yes.
I hope that is possible. As I, for one, I have been tagged on Twitter as state-affiliated media, and yet if you look at my counterparts from the Voice of America, for instance, if you look at Deutsche Welle, nothing is said about their relationship with the state they come from. I wonder why, and I want to know the transparency and the consistency of their standard there.